Joining me today to talk about evidence-based ways that you can lose weight is Rachel Smith, who is an expert on obesity, longevity, also is the program director of Discover Health in Florida. She also has a real focus on women's health and wellness, and specifically on postmenopausal women. So welcome to GRUFFtalk, Rachel.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. This has really been in the news a lot because I think because of Ozempic and the other drugs that are helping people to lose weight very quickly and rather easily, it seems. And so weight loss is once again kind of in the discourse, don't you think?
It is a hot topic. There's a lot of chatter out there.
There really is. And I read a lot of medical journals, and one of the ones I read last week, I believe it may have been Helio, was an article that was written by you, and it focused on intermittent fasting. And I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. In fact, I do it myself rather frequently. I follow the program, and people have heard me talk about this, and I've written about it quite a bit. The program put forth by Dr. Walter Longo out at the University of Southern California. And it's a really fascinating program. I really believe in the science. So I was very intrigued by your article, which I read. And then I said, I'd like to have her on the show to talk more about intermittent fasting as a strategy of one of
Sure.
many to help people to lose weight. But then when you and I started to talk, we said, we need to go a little bit deeper into some of the other strategies as well, and not just focus on intermittent fasting, which is what we're going to do today. So let's start from the very beginning. What is obesity, and how is it different from being overweight?
Sure. So obesity, first of all, I think foundationally that framework that we work with our patients within is an understanding that this is a chronic metabolic disease. But the definition of obesity is still based on the BMI guidelines, which we'll talk about in a bit. May not be ideal, may not be perfect, but it is a useful and quick tool for clinicians to use to evaluate the risk for a specific patient. So the BMI guidelines say that obesity starts at a BMI of 30. Overweight starts at a BMI, or body mass index, of 25 and above. So it's a range, and we can talk about the pitfalls of BMI, but essentially what we're trying to get at is how much excess fat is carried on the body, and how is that excess fat impacting an individual's health risks.
Right. We could jump right now to the BMI as the gold standard of, understanding if someone is overweight, normal weight, or even obese. I'm intrigued by this because I've been seeing many, many studies in recent years, actually, about how BMI should really be kind of put to the side at this point, really because of the shift toward more personalized medicine and healthcare. But why don't you just tell us a little bit more about that? And if BMI is no longer the gold standard, although I know, of course, it is still used quite frequently, what is the best way to determine if someone really is not at their ideal, healthiest weight?
Sure. So body mass index is simply an equation that is based on height and weight. So the example I give to my patients is you could have two individuals, let's just say they're both 6 feet tall and they both weigh 280 pounds. With that information alone, I really don't have any idea whether they're at a healthy weight or not. Regardless, we're going to have a very specific BMI based on height and weight. Let's say one of those individuals is an NFL linebacker. And the other one, let's just say, is a software programmer and has a desk job and has always been more sedentary. Their body mass index may be exactly the same with very different body composition. So one of them presumably would have a great deal more lean mass, especially muscle, whereas the other one is very likely to have, at the same weight, an excess of fat and less muscle. So the impact on health at the very same weight is very different. And that's why BMI is really a very not necessarily inaccurate. It's a great screening tool, but that's as far as it goes. It can miss a lot of people who actually do have excess body fat, especially in certain populations. So we know that certain populations are going to be healthy at a higher BMI, and certain populations, Asian populations, for example, at that same BMI will have an excess of body fat. So the BMI guidelines have to be different for different ethnicities.
Right.
Which is fascinating. Right?
That really, it is fascinating. And also, let's now jump over to postmenopausal women. Now, we do know that metabolism can change as we go through menopause and estrogen levels are dropping. I've covered that in great detail in other episodes and in my books, but also, this doesn't happen to everyone, but it does happen to many women where they say things like, oh, I used to be able to eat anything I wanted, and now I'm still eating the same thing and I'm gaining weight. I've tried every diet and nothing seems to be working and I've still gained weight. I can't lose the weight that I did gain. Things like that. But we also know what happens with muscle mass. We start to lose muscle mass as we get older with each passing year, unless we're doing something active to counter that, as we know, with the right food, enough protein, and certainly with strength training exercises and the like. But really, the question I'm leading up to now is that very often postmenopausal women will gain weight in their middle area. And that really, has many different names: belly fat, visceral fat, which is the more medical term. It's fat that's what I call evil fat that can wrap itself around your organs. I mean, it's unhealthy fat in the middle. And so that's where another way of measuring fat on your body is with a simple tape measure. And how important is that in your opinion?
Yeah, waist circumference is a really valid tool. What we use in our practice as a baseline measurement, and it's a measurement we follow with our patients quarterly during their work with us, is a body composition test. And there are several different ways to do body composition to actually measure body fat percentage, skeletal muscle, and lean body mass. And these test results give us so much valuable information, especially for that postmenopausal female, especially for that postmenopausal female who's been dieting quite a bit over her lifetime. Maybe not extreme diets, but she's always been paying attention, as we all do, right? There's always an occasion and a dress we need to fit into. Mm-hmm. So we're always on one diet or another. And the cumulative effect of that over the years is even more muscle loss than we would expect normally. Normally, we would expect about 1 to 1.5% muscle loss per year. And I think that starts much earlier than menopause. I think after the age of 30, we're likely to begin losing muscle unless we're actively trying to preserve it.
That's exactly right. And, the correlation there, too, is that is bone loss. They're very much connected, of course. And once we're in our late 20s, that's when peak bone mass occurs, right? Where our bones are at the strongest they'll ever be in our lifetime. Like, we build up to that point and they are super strong. And then every year after that, they start to get thinner, weaker, and, more prone to fracturing if you fall, unless you do something actively to counter that. So you're right. That's true of muscle mass as well. Absolutely. It starts earlier than menopause. But menopause, like with so many things for women, it expedites it. It just speeds everything up.
It seems to. And the research, I love the research, because the experts would tell us that on average, women will gain about 4 pounds during the menopausal transition. Now, I feel like that's ridiculous, but that's what the research says. Of course, that's from my experience. I'm working with a population of women who are struggling with weight gain. So those women who gain 4 pounds during the menopausal transition are not showing up in my office, right? So they're self-selecting, and I'm seeing that population who is struggling, and they're gaining more than that. And the question is, why? Is it just the drop in estrogen? Is it simply the loss of muscle mass? What else is going on there? I think there are multiple factors. But for some women, it does become, sometimes their story is, I've been at an ideal weight my entire life, and now suddenly my doctor says I'm almost in the obese category. Frightening and very frustrating for women.
Do you find that your research and, with your own patients observationally, that metabolism does in fact change enough to impact weight loss, weight gain as women go through and then come out of menopause?
I think that, that's an interesting question, because some studies would say that our resting energy expenditure is fairly stable throughout life until we get to more extremes of age, say maybe late 60s or 70s, that it will actually begin to slow down. But the impact of loss of skeletal muscle on that resting energy expenditure, I think, is enough to explain a lot of what's going on there. So
yeah, that's
yes,
interesting.
There's a slowdown. Also, you have, I'm sure, had the experience. We all know people who are very much like an Energizer bunny. They are going, they are on, their energy is palpable. You can feel it. They're moving. They're
always moving.
Fast.
Yep.
They're very energized. And then the opposite extreme of that would be individuals who are, and this is a terrible way for me to stereotype, but it's an image that really resonates, are very much more like an Eeyore kind of personality. Slow, very methodical. They move slowly. They talk slowly. Their energy is much more blunted. And I think we're born with a set point. I think genetically we're born with that. And that is somewhat a reflection of our resting energy expenditure. That's my sense of it. And
that's really, really interesting. I mean, I do feel, and I'm so glad you said that we're kind of born with it. It's genetic. It's really an important psychological statement, because, so many times we feel that, oh, it's our fault. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. Or let's face it, everybody could be moving a little bit more probably, or, doing more to focus on our bones and muscle. But for the most part, there are some of us who are predisposed to, to being heavier or gaining weight more easily, not being able to lose it as easily, for sure. I mean, I think that the science does show that to be true.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, certain families, you can see that predisposition to save energy. In horsemen's terms, this is a big horsing area here in Florida, easy keeper. If you're an easy keeper, you save energy. You store energy readily and you don't burn it. And that is innate. We're born with that to some sense. I don't think it explains everything. And of course, there are even more extreme cases of genetic types of obesity where individuals are born with a specific defect genetically that will result in very severe forms of obesity from an early age. That's not generally what I'm talking about. I do take care of those patients, rarely, because it's very rare. But as we look around and see our peers and family members struggling, some of them seem to be able to eat whatever they want, exercise or not, and never struggle, and others will struggle. But we all, every one of us, live in what we call an obesogenic environment. That is, the world we live in predisposes us to weight gain. It really does.
That's really is interesting. So getting back to how at your practice, Discover Health in Florida, how do you actually measure? You referenced it before. How do you actually measure that BMI and that the body composition really?
Sure.
You said that you do that, but how do you do that?
So the tool we have is a very fancy scale. It's a medical grade scale that measures through bioelectrical impedance. And what's great is there are home scales that do this now, and very affordable. I think you can get a scale off Amazon for $40 or $50. Well, and some of you have these at home where you stand on the scale and it will give you a report of body fat percentage. Some of them come very close to giving us a number that we get here in the office. that's pretty cool that we have
That's
that technology that you
amazing.
can do at home. Yes.
That's amazing. I'll make sure to put in some links about that so people, if they're interested in getting one for home use, that they can do so.
Sure. Yeah, the medical grade is going to be a $12,000 machine versus the $40 scale you can use at home. But it's bioelectrical impedance, so it sends a very mild electrical current through the soles of your bare feet, and as it travels through the body's tissues, the speed at which it travels through liquid and solid mass is different. So it can tell the difference between skeletal muscle, it can tell the difference between fat and even body fluids.
That's really fascinating. I think I have to come to Florida and have you check me out.
Sure,
So
you may
I know
be
what's
able to
going
find.
on.
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Many
so
medical
once,
practices have these.
yeah, okay. So once someone does, whether it's at home or they come to your practice or another practice that has such a scale, or they just use the straight old BMI and maybe mix with the tape measure around their waist. However, they realize that, you know what? I'm not at my healthiest weight. And by the way, I have very often said, like, how do you even know you're at your healthiest weight? If you're kind of borderline, like maybe you think maybe you're overweight, but you're not 100% sure, or the BMI is saying that. But healthy weight really is very personal, as we were saying earlier. It's also, how do you feel? You know, what is your waist measurement? I think that that is critical. And I believe for women, it is still should be under 35 inches or less than half your height. Like, I think those are the two. Do you agree with that?
I do.
Yeah.
I don't use waist circumference because we do have more sensitive tools. So
Exactly
it's not
right.
one that I follow closely, but it's a handy one for you to use at home.
For you to, exactly, to use at home. And so once you've gotten all of this information, you know, what do you do with it? You know, and how else are you feeling? What are your health check numbers like at the doctor's office when you go, hopefully every year, for your annual physical? Cholesterol and the other blood work that you have done. What does that all look like? Are you in a healthy state? So I think that a lot of that has to do with how you feel about what is your ideal weight. I think it's always important to, if you can, kind of come to that number in partnership with a trusted healthcare provider. And then you can take it from there. If you feel that you need to lose some weight, then, you know, work in partnership and have a plan and a program in place. But so once a person has decided that their ideal healthiest weight is X and they're not at X, what are some of the best strategies at the moment, the most current evidence-based strategies that you have and that you use in your own practice, Rachel, that will help people, specifically postmenopausal women, get to X?
Here's what I think. Dieting doesn't work. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. That's science-based. Dieting doesn't work. And yet, unfortunately, if you want to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit. So how do we balance those two? The reason dieting doesn't work is because of the way it's been done traditionally. We restrict calories, and we restrict them more and more. And in doing so, we generally end up restricting too much protein and we lose too much muscle. What happens? You get to your goal weight and you go off the diet and you very rapidly regain the weight. And the weight that you regain is mostly fat. So now your body composition is worse than when you started, even if your weight ends up at the same point. But generally it bounces back even higher. Most people have had that experience. They regain weight and it brought friends.
Yeah, the yo-yo.
So now they're at a heavier weight and their body composition is worse. They've lost muscle. So this actually slows metabolism over time. So we have to start with that premise that if the way that we've done dieting in the past doesn't work, what are we going to do? Well, we have to take a comprehensive approach because it's a very complex chronic disease. We have to understand that this work is lifelong work. There's not a diet. I don't have a 6-week program. I don't have a 21 days to a brand new you. That's not going to work. Unfortunately, I wish that I had that because patients want that.
It might at the very least help you kickstart, maybe,
Sure.
or no. But in other words, you're saying steer clear of things like that, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think we have to. Okay, so we do take a very comprehensive approach. That is, we have to look at what you're doing nutritionally. So I start with a diet history, a very thorough diet history, to understand, how do you like to eat? What foods do you enjoy? Are you avoiding certain broad categories of food? Gluten intolerant? Do you have any other food allergies that you can't do? I need to know what your food life looks like. And we'll make some recommendations. For my postmenopausal women, it is not uncommon that my first recommendations to them have them eating more food than when they came to me.
Mm-hmm.
We can call it reverse dieting. We can call it a refeed. But essentially what I'm trying to get them to understand is we have to take a protein forward approach. And it feels like they're eating more than they were eating before. Probably the volume of food, when you're eating protein and an emphasis on whole foods, foods that are close to their natural state, which is the easiest way to define it. And most people are on board with that. And many people, by the time they come to me, they've tried all the things. It is a classic example that I have a 54-year-old female come in. She's walking 3 miles a day. She's doing Pilates at her Pilates studio 3 times a week. And she's even lifting some light weights, right? With her 3-pound weights. And she's eating a whole foods diet, and she's very low carb. So how do I help her lose weight, right?
Yeah.
You have to start with a protein forward approach. Okay. Nutritionally, that seems to be the one thing that makes the biggest difference.
I'm going to stop you right there and just, can you define protein forward? What does that actually mean?
It means that that's the one macronutrient that we're going to make sure you get. We're going to make sure you get it 2 to 3 times a day. So if you're an individual who prefers intermittent fasting and are very comfortable eating 2 meals a day, then your per meal protein requirement will be higher. But if you are a standard 3 meal a day individual, then your protein requirement based on age will be either 30 or 35 grams for an older population of protein per meal. Once you've gotten that protein, if you're not used to getting that amount of protein, you're going to be very satiated. You may not have room for very much more. That protein tends to crowd out a lot of the other emptier nutrients. That's helpful for the work that we're doing. But it's important. I talk to patients about that threshold that you need to reach of protein in order to activate muscle protein synthesis to preserve, build, maintain muscle. If we're not doing that, we have the potential of making our patients sicker rather than healthier. So
about protein 3 times a day, I agree with you 100%, and this is something that I personally make sure I do. I had actually twice. I had the co-authors of the Whole Body Reset on my program. And they talked about, it's an AARP book, and they talked specifically about protein intake for people, over 50, right? Sure. Midlife and beyond specifically. And they both stressed how important it is for getting protein early in the day. And so it's very possible if you do the intermittent fasting, the form of intermittent fasting where you don't eat for, say, 13 to 16 hours, and that means then you probably aren't having that first meal of the day, that you're then putting your body, and I actually want your reaction to this, you're putting your body into a protein and muscle deficit. What is your feeling about that? How important in your mind, and according to what you know from your own research, is it to get protein early in the day when you start being active with your life, or does it not really matter?
There are apparently some good studies showing that the first and last meal of the day are the most important times to get the protein. So for patients who perhaps really don't have it in them to have 3 what feels like heavy meals a day, I might urge them to start with a good bolus of protein in the morning. Maybe just a little salad if they'd like for lunch, and then a nice good dose of protein in the evening. It's tougher for my patients who like intermittent fasting or have never been a breakfast eater, because I agree, what is the risk inherent in that? I think we can't eliminate all risk, because no matter what, this work has to be sustainable. If you're not somebody who likes breakfast, and I'm telling you, you absolutely have to eat breakfast, are you going to stick with it very long?
Right.
Not likely.
And you're so right.
You.
It has to be sustainable. People have to stay with it for it to work long term.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating when patients come in and they have not been eating that protein. When I see them for their first follow-up visit, it's really impressive what they tell me. Sometimes it's just that they haven't quite figured it out. They're still struggling to figure out what types of foods they can eat and will enjoy. But often they're talking about improved sleep and improved energy already just by increasing protein.
Yeah. No.
They may not have lost very much weight, but they're feeling better because
but they're
nourishing
feeling
their body.
better. And also, isn't it true that, I mean, it could be because they're increasing their protein intake, they may also be following some other, protocols that you've set for them, like strength training, resistance training, which might be then increasing muscle. So it's very possible that they could be losing fat and just gaining muscle. Therefore, their weight is staying where it was. I mean, that's also, that could be a little discouraging maybe for some people who don't see any weight change, although things are really getting better in the bigger picture sense, right?
Right. That's why we do the follow-up body composition testing, so that if we have a patient who's not quite seeing the efficiency that they want to see, if they've really embraced the strength training and they're working out regularly, it is going to slow down the number that they see on the scale. Unfortunately, I would love to be able to deliver really efficient weight loss. Patients in general want more than 2 pounds a week, but that's not safe weight loss.
No. I mean, we've read that, we've seen that for years and years and years, and I truly believe that too. So, okay, so protein forward eating, adding more protein in, best if you can add it in the morning, unless if you're doing the intermittent fasting. I still say at this point, with the research that I've seen, really at this age, I'm talking specifically 50 and over and like 60 and over, really tread carefully with intermittent fasting, right? To make sure that you don't lose muscle mass. So let's go on to some other strategies that you use.
There's 4 pillars, right? So we've got nutrition, the activity and exercise piece of it. And those two are the 2 sides of the energy equation, right? How much energy is coming in? How much energy are we expending each day? And so those are really the foundation of any weight loss program, nutrition and activity. So you've already touched on it. The strength training is the piece most people have to add in. Helping some of my patients, especially my postmenopausal females who learned in the 80s and 90s to use their treadmill to manage their weight, helping them walk away from that cardio, those hour-long cardio sessions every day. I think that is really beneficial for some of them.
Expand on that, please. You're saying you're asking, if I got that right, you're asking them not to spend an hour on the treadmill.
Sometimes I want them to take a break from that kind of just doggedly, intense daily cardio. And I don't have hard research to support this, but I think that it sometimes is sending the wrong signal to the body. If you are exercising because you enjoy going outside and going for a run and you get all of the benefit of that in terms of endorphins, I think that's a very different experience than getting on the treadmill and watching the calorie meter count up, as you're burning.
Could not agree more. As a runner, I couldn't agree more with you. That would be so horrible to me to go onto a treadmill. Number one, just to go onto a treadmill. I'm not a treadmill person. But you're right, because one of the great enjoyments of my life is to go outside in nature and run or walk, run and walk, but being outside and not even thinking about the calories that are being burnt. Continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes I do ask them to modify what they're doing with exercise. Let's walk daily. Our exercise guidelines are 300 minutes a week. So that works out to 40 minutes a day, 6 days a week. And I start my patients out with a goal of daily walking. If they're not doing anything, a goal of daily walking, 45 minutes, that should be about 3 miles of walking. And you can do it in divided sessions. Your body doesn't care if you do it all at once or if you divide it up. You can take a walk before work, a walk over your lunch hour, a little walk after dinner. Beautiful. And then we add a couple of sessions of strength training a week, full body to exhaustion, right? Following all the guidelines for progressive muscle overload. And for many women in this age group, that is a foreign concept to them. So we really have to encourage and support and remind them, you are not going to get bulky, right? It's not easy to build muscle. This does not happen accidentally.
Right.
You have to be very intentional, and we're all about just supporting and maintaining your muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And then we want a little bit of that higher intensity cardio. I like HIIT workouts.
Yep.
For patients who are really pressed for time, I like the Tabata workouts. They're even shorter. But we... So that a typical Tabata workout would be something like 4 to 7 minutes of very high intensity. This is going to be burpees and jumping jacks and push-ups. By the end of the 4 to 7 minutes, you're going to be laying on the floor panting for breath. It's a very high intensity workout, but
very, very effective.
Way.
And so
very
I guess,
effective.
so this scientist really kind of started this whole thing with HIIT, H-I-I-T. And then, of course, there is the very famous and now very used, very popular New York Times 7-minute workout.
Right.
Which I guess is based on that.
Right. So you can pull up Tabata apps for free.
Got it.
And those are easy to find.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So you recommend that to your patients for the cardio aspect, if you will.
If they're pressed for time,
mm-hmm.
and, that's the biggest thing. I don't have time,
mm-hmm.
right? None of us have time.
Right.
Lives are so busy. So if you don't have 7 minutes, really, if you don't have 7 minutes in your day,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what's so interesting, Rachel, is that I recently had on the show Gretchen Reynolds, who was for over 20 years was the health writer for the New York Times. And then she moved over about 6 months ago to the Washington Post with a bunch of other health writers. They all kind of went over together for some odd reason. But anyway, so she was on the show talking about a few of the articles that she's done recently. One of them was about exercise snacks. And that's a really big term now. And it's exactly that. It's even shorter than a 7-minute. I mean, that's a true workout, this Tabata or the 7-minute workout from the New York Times. But an exercise snack is, for example, right now you and I are sitting here and we are talking. We'll be done at some point. And then after that, I'm planning on going down and doing about 10 or 20 push-ups because I've been sitting here. Or I'll go, climb up and down stairs for about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And then I'll do that throughout the day especially when I haven't gone out for a run, which I did not do today because it was pouring rain. So those are exercise snacks. And you mentioned before how, like the body doesn't really keep tabs on whether you've done that 40-minute walk at one time or you broke it up. It doesn't really care that much. Which is the premise behind exercise snacks. And it really works, everyone.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
I call it something different. I call it sneaky exercise.
I love it.
And
okay.
We just, I do the same thing. I remember I was at a previous practice about 10 years ago, and we had gorgeous, huge employee restrooms. They were like 12 by 12. And so I would go in between patients and I would do push-ups, and sometimes I would do handstands against the wall just between patients, right?
I love it.
One of the other physicians walked in and caught me doing handstands in the bathroom. Embarrassing. But that's what I've always done. And I teach my patients the same thing. Especially for women who've never done push-ups, we start them with countertop push-ups. Can you do 10, right? You work up from countertop to being able to do them on your knees, and eventually, guess what? You'll be able to do push-ups full military style.
Right.
And that's a powerful move for a postmenopausal female.
Absolutely.
Right.
But boy, does it work. My favorite, yes. I think, along with that, of course, then the squat. I think squats first without weights and then, of course, with weights when you can do it, but is the plank. I just think the plank is the most incredible exercise and really kind of keeps everything kind of taut and tight and strong.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it anywhere, anytime.
Yep.
I love that, if you're waiting on the microwave, do a set of squats.
Absolutely.
Right?
But
So we're talking about the various things that we put into place for patients, and the 4 different areas: nutrition, exercise, the behavioral piece of it is huge. And really the behavioral piece, if we have any amount of serious weight to lose, that's usually an issue. It's the elephant in the corner. It is how our culture has taught us it's okay to use food to treat our emotions, our negative emotions. And I'm not a clinical psychologist. I have training as an advanced nurse practitioner and a health coach, and a lot of that is behavioral work. But the component of emotional eating and how that has really just become the cultural norm, and it's okay. Everyone does it. We all do it.
Do you find that that's a really big component or a big aspect of your patients who come to see you? Emotional eating, or the emotions of eating and the relationship to food?
Now, yes, this is a very real issue, and I would say there are very few patients that we don't have to do this work with. Very few. But listen, I'm working with a population of people who have tried all the diets.
Yeah.
They've already done the low carb thing. They've done paleo. They've eliminated broad food groups. They're exercising. They've gone to extremes already. Now they are sitting in an obesity medicine specialist office. Okay, so these are people who didn't just gain 10 pounds with menopause.
Got it.
Generally.
Yep.
Okay, so I don't think everyone who has a few pounds to gain struggles with emotional eating. I'm not saying that, but many of my patients do.
Oh. Mm-hmm. So what's the next pillar? So the relationship to food and... Mm-hmm.
Yes, medication.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that. That's a big one.
Yeah, that's the exciting one. That's what everybody's talking about right now. So it's great. We are living in a very exciting time. There are new and better medications. Even the old standard medications that we had to work with for years still work really well. So if there are listeners out there who have heard about some of these newer ones, the Ozempic and the Wegovy are the two that are really hot in the news. And if their insurance doesn't cover these medications, take heart, because there are other tools that do still work. Appetite suppressants work very well if appetite is a struggle. It's not always a struggle. Medications that specifically target emotional eating and cravings can be very effective, and sometimes we'll layer those medications. So I'm not naming specific medications right now, but there's various classes of medications, and in the profession of obesity medicine, it is standard practice that we look specifically for what our patient struggles with, and there are various tools that we use to evaluate that, and then we try to target those specific struggles with a medication that will suit them. Of course, we have to make sure that there are no contraindications, that it's safe and isn't going to interfere with other medications that they're on. So that can be a challenge at times, but we're looking for something that will help them with what they struggle with. So for some people, they never feel hungry. An appetite suppressant wouldn't really be beneficial for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? These newer medications, the GLP-1 agonists,
Mm-hmm.
like Ozempic and Wegovy, they seem to work a little differently than some of the medications we've had in the past. They're communicating directly with our hypothalamus, and they're sending a message from our gut where GLP-1 is made in response to nutrient intake. So when we eat a meal, GLP-1 is normally released and it goes to the hypothalamus, and it sends a message of satiety. Satiety is, I'm good. I've had enough. Not I'm full. Not that Thanksgiving feeling of I need to loosen my belt, but I'm good. And when you have good satiety, you might leave food on your plate. Okay. So these medications upregulate satiety.
So
Correct.
Is hormone therapy one of the medications that you discuss with your patients? And also old, like you mentioned, kind of old, tried and true medications. What about the others that really impact insulin resistance, which really is an issue and a contributor to weight loss, as we know, like metformin, things like that.
Yes.
What do you views on that?
Yeah, I like metformin, and if I have a patient who I cannot get into a GLP-1 class based on insurance coverage, then I will often add metformin in and layer it with some other medications, because as a standalone agent, it's not a big player for weight loss. We would expect maybe 2 to 3 pounds of weight loss per year. My patients are looking for more than that usually.
Yeah.
Right. So, but yes, its role in insulin resistance can be very helpful in addition to some of the other medications that we would use that would actually give them a weight loss benefit.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question about hormone replacement therapy, that is not a tool that's in our toolkit currently, mainstream, for weight loss and for obesity medicine, because we unfortunately don't have really good studies to say that hormone replacement therapy helps women lose weight.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And yet we think there might be something there, right? You and I are having this discussion about the drop in estrogen levels and how it impacts our muscle and our skeletal muscle mass, and how that lowers our metabolism potentially. It's not something that I prescribe to patients, but it is often a conversation that I have with them. If they are in that window, I will likely send them back to their gynecologist to have that discussion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not because I think it's going to help with weight loss, but they may get some other benefits that may be helpful for them.
Yeah.
If they're a good candidate, right? And if it's a safe option for them.
Right. I mean, there are so many factors that go into being a good candidate or not for HT, as we know. But for somebody who is, that's the perfect solution, is to send that person back to their gynecologist or endocrinologist to discuss. Yep. What do you see looking forward, looking ahead? What do you see on the horizon? Anything interesting? Do you see more drugs coming out? Do you think that will continue to be the new shiny thing? Are there other tools, techniques, anything that you see coming down the pike? I'm really, really interested in hearing about.
Sure.
And the audiences too.
This is already out there, so I don't have any news that nobody's heard about. But yes, there are new drugs in this same GLP-1 category. There's a triple G from Eli Lilly that we're looking to maybe be out in 25. And so we're still a couple of years out from that one. What we've got right now is the GLP-1s, Wegovy and Ozempic. And then Mounjaro is on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And Mounjaro, again, is a diabetes medication. And it's a GLP-1 plus a GIP. And so that adds a second angle of attack, essentially, on the same problem, and seems to have greater efficacy with about the same side effect profile. So Mounjaro has been very effective for diabetes. And we've seen in the off-label use that has been done, we've seen really impressive weight loss. Mounjaro will be released for weight loss probably later this year.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that, patients get very excited. Like, I hear Mounjaro is going to be approved soon. Yes, but will your insurance cover it for weight loss?
And we know, we've heard how expensive it is.
Right. So yes, there's more and more research, more and more drugs in this class and other drugs that will be coming out. But there's also some pushback, and that's exciting to me too, because what I know is we don't have a cure, and there is no magic pill or magic injection. And no matter what combination of medications I give to a patient, if they're unable to do the lifestyle work, I can max them out on medication and they'll still gain weight.
Right.
That's
I think
sad.
a big fear or concern is that people might stop thinking about the lifestyle choices if they are able to take an injection or a pill and lose weight. And then they think, well, I don't have to do the strength training. I don't have to do all these other things, losing the weight. And that's really was my goal. I mean, that's always a concern, right? I'm sure that's a concern that you have, that your patients aren't compliant with the other pillars.
Sure. And again, I think most of my patients get it. They come to me and they understand I don't want a magic pill. But on the other hand, we all kind of want a magic pill. We all really would like to just be done with this yesterday, right? So if a magic pill came along,
the reality,
it, right? But we don't have one, and we're not likely to have one.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I see, and along with all the chatter about Ozempic and Wegovy, is the chatter around semaglutide, the compounded, and I see it being sold and marketed at diet clinics and day spas, personal trainers. Everybody can get their hand on semaglutide without comprehensive lifestyle intervention. That is not a service. It's not helping people. I don't believe it's helping people. So that's my concern.
Yeah.
You have to do the work. And that's not saying that this is a character flaw, right? It is just a very complex chronic disease. And we have to learn how to manage this chronic, complex disease. And that is lifestyle intervention.
Mm-hmm.
That's been proven time and time again. So yes, there's exciting things in terms of drugs, but exciting things too in terms of what's available and helpful in terms of really just, the craze in dieting for so many years was keto and low carb, and there's starting to be a little bit of pushback on that in terms of a more flexible approach.
Yes.
Helping patients understand that carbohydrates aren't evil, right?
Right.
There's
Or
nothing
and
wrong with
even
the potato.
like full fats aren't evil either, right? Of having a little butter, I put a little heavy cream, very little
Sure.
heavy cream in my coffee. I mean, I agree with you. There is some pushback now and a kind of a revisiting of all different foods, which is really such an important thing.
I think so. The wearables, I think, are an exciting area where there's so much more being done from, our step trackers and our Apple and Garmin watches and our rings that track our sleep. Yes.
Wearing my
And
Apple
the
Watch.
CGM is fascinating. Lots of people are jumping on the CGM bandwagon. Those are really interesting pieces of what lies ahead, along with the medication, of course.
Mm-hmm. I mentioned before that I was with I had a doctor on recently talking about, actually in this case, the health of your microbiome and how it affects your skin. And she said the next gift to herself after she got the Aura ring to check on sleep is she's getting the glucose monitor, the CGM. What does it stand for?
The continuous glucose monitor.
Continuous glucose
Yes.
monitor, right. It's very intriguing, and I love to experiment on myself. Like that's when I first tried the intermittent fasting with Dr. Longo, was for my last book, and I did the whole blood work and measurements, everything, and then 3 months later, after three times doing his program once a month, and then I retested myself, and it really was quite impressive. So I love doing that sort of thing with myself. So I may actually get myself one too, just to see what, only because I love doing that stuff
It's
with myself and
intriguing. The
report back
studies-
to everybody.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the studies don't necessarily play out that they're effective as a weight loss tool.
Right.
But I think there's a certain population that are just data driven. They like to see the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably fall into that category too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, no, I find it intriguing. And then just some other things you mentioned about how, other things that we're looking at ahead, but just some very recent things, recent studies that I think have really helped people a lot. Like you called it sneaky fitness, and I said exercise snacks. I mean, the fact that people now understand that they don't have to devote 2 hours, or they don't have to go to a gym, that they can do these things in a few minutes at a time, a few times during the day, just makes it all that much more accessible. And the idea of this new information about protein and what the authors of the Whole Body Reset call protein timing. You call it protein forward. This is all really very, very important information that we didn't know about a while ago. And also studies about sleep and how sleep, or lack thereof, can impact your weight in ways that we never understood until very recently. So, with all of this new information, the studies, and more need to be done, of course. And I think more studies need to be done on all of these new medications for weight loss, in kind of across the board. But so I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. But yeah, we know so much more now, and I do think that different aspects of weight loss have just become more accessible. Wouldn't you agree?
I do think so. I think so. That doesn't make it less
Oh,
challenging.
no, 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 no,
But we
for
do have tools.
sure. And that's why we're very happy that we have you and your colleagues who are helping people to not only kind of get the right tools in their hands to lose that weight and get to what is their personal healthiest weight, but also to find out what's the underlying reason, which I know is a big part of what you focus on as well, especially the emotional aspect of it. So, we covered so much. And like I said, there will be links to a lot of what we talked about and things that you referenced in the show notes down below. But I always like to share 3 top takeaways that you think the Gruff Talk audience should really remember from our conversation today. So, Rachel, what are your top 3 takeaways from today?
Okay. I think, especially for the postmenopausal female, don't be afraid of protein. Increase your protein if you can. 30 to 35 grams per meal. That's what we're looking for. A whole foods approach. So that's the nutrition bullet, right? Whole foods, protein forward. Number 2 would be under exercise. Strength training is really where it's at. You have the potential to really upcharge your metabolism by growing some muscle. And so many studies that say the more muscle you have, the better you're going to age. The lower your risk for all the things we die of in this country. So we can't lose if we grow muscle. And then finally, the emotional aspect. For postmenopausal females, there's so much going on, right? We're pulled in multiple directions with young adult children and aging parents and our careers at the very peak. And we live in a very stressful time. If we are not on top of handling our stress, improving our sleep, finding healthy ways to feel better in the face of all that stress, that's what we need to focus on rather than turning to food or alcohol, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so the emotional piece.
And we do know
There's a
that there
lot
was
there.
an uptick in both of those during COVID, right?
I've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. This was very, very helpful, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back again and give us some more
It was a lot
updates.
of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.